idea for the show.
I still don't know what the idea is.
It's about nothing.
Right.
Everybody's doing something. We'll do nothing.
They say, what's your show about? I say nothing.
There you go.
I think you may have something here.
Cross Coast Bias presents the League About Nothing podcast.
All right, everyone, welcome back to episode 6, our week 2 recap. We have much higher scores this week to discuss, some better scoring, some more interesting action going on in the actual NFL, and that lends itself to those higher fantasy scores. Our median score this week puts last week's median score to shame. We had 180 last week, or 182, I should say. And this week we had a league median score of 224.13. So a significant leap in our league scores. But before we get into those matchups, we want to go over some of the trades and waivers that have taken place. Unfortunately, we're extremely disappointed to report that there have been no trades. I blame everyone, but most specifically my co-host. Al, what do you have to say for yourself?
I can promise you it's not for lack of effort on my part.
So unfortunately, no trades, but we did have a little bit of movement on the waiver wire last week. We said at the end of last episode we'd cover the waivers from last week on this week's show. We didn't have any significant moves. No one paid big money for anyone. The largest transaction was Melvin Gordon dropping Julius Chestnut for $6. There was 4 bids for that, so a little bit of action. I think the second highest bid, you and I tied at $3 a piece. So not exactly a blockbuster move, but Gordon appears to be moving into a position of greater importance in that Baltimore backfield.
Yeah, as expected, this is a deep league. There's not going to be much excitement on the waiver wire. Second, third, fourth string guys are owned at key positions. We're not expecting any real impactful players to be available. And that held true in week 1, where none of these players made anyone's lineup in week 2. I think the highest score was River Craycraft with under 7 points as far as waiver pickups are concerned.
Yep, and he was in fact the second highest bid, or tied for the second highest bid, and you ended up with him. So a couple other players that got picked up. Kokieft. Is it Kieft?
Sure. Sure, guess is mine.
All right. I feel like I should have looked that up beforehand. That's all right. Kokieft, $4 to Mel.
Literally only matters in this.
Yeah, it doesn't even matter in this league. He didn't make any. He didn't get any points. It's fine. We can pretend that didn't happen.
This is
Mel
the only league that he's owned in.
Wishes we could pretend that didn't happen.
I mean, to be fair, he only dropped Randall Cobb, who also scored 0 points, so it wasn't a big loss there.
This is true. Also being claimed, Kavontae Turpin by Rugg for $2, Jake Funk by you for $2, Owen Wright for $1 by me, and then you got Patrick Taylor for $1, which I actually think is one worth watching.
Yeah, none of those players were useful. Unfortunately, Jake Funk did not see a single offensive snap this week.
Well, who's got room for any snaps behind Zach Moss, who apparently is going to lead the entire league in snap count?
100% of the snaps for the Colts this week.
No. When you've got a player of Moss's caliber, you just any excuse to get him on the field.
You joke, but I'm still salty that we did not take Zach Moss in the other league several years ago.
What you talking about?
He's the only player left.
Edwards is going to come through any day now.
He's the only player left in that group that still has any value. We could have played him this week. Would have been helpful.
So for anyone who doesn't remember, we may have talked about it before. If we haven't, I'll tell now. We co-manage a team in another league, and we had a second round pick several years back where we were split decision on who to draft. Al wanted Zach Moss. I wanted Chase Claypool, and we compromised and took Bryan Edwards. Obviously, that was not a good compromise.
The classic lose scenario.
And it has gone back and forth 5 or 6 times now about which would have been the better selection overall. Because obviously Claypool flashed his rookie year, but also Moss got some snap count his second year, I think, where Claypool was struggling, and then Moss was looking like he was on the complete outs. Then Claypool got traded. And this one has gone back and forth 100 times. I'm pretty sure the correct answer was none of these players.
It was definitely not Edwards.
Yeah, that's for sure.
He's done absolutely nothing outside of being the TO of training camp. That's about all he's done so far.
So those two players are doomed to flip-flop in value from now till eternity. And we are doomed to continuously push this boulder up the hill.
Good
Sisyphus reference. Yeah, that's why the people come. The good Sisyphus reference
for the Greek mythology.
Yeah. Anyway, so let's those are the waivers. Nothing terribly exciting. Maybe one of these guys gets into a position of more value later on. We'll see. And we'll be sure to cover next week with the same level of intensity and hopefully have a little bit more excitement to talk about then.
I have doubts.
See, the problem with having such a savvy league is that all the players that are worth anything were drafted, and if they weren't, they were scooped up almost immediately when the training camp hype started coming out.
Yeah, our waiver wire is going to be pretty barren for probably the entire season, as it was the season before that. No surprise why people are so willing to trade me Fab for actual useful players, because the Fab will not buy any useful players in the future, most likely.
Yet somehow 3 weeks from now, you'll find yourself with none anyways.
Yeah. I'm surprised I still have any Fab left at this point. I really wanted to spend 100 Fab on Melvin Gordon.
Well, the restraint you've shown is admirable.
We'll see how long it lasts.
Yeah. So before we get into the specific matchups, the league matchups, I wanted to just check in on some of the injury front stuff that we discussed last week. A few guys coming back from some preseason injuries, like Kelsey and Andrews at the tight end position, who we covered pretty heavily. Neither one of them had great games, but nice to see them both back on the field and producing.
Yeah, it was definitely impactful. I mean, Mark Andrews was the number 3 scorer on the week in tight ends, and Kelsey was number 8. Got in the end zone, even on a limited snap share. He was impactful. Definitely nice to have some actual tight ends back.
Yeah.
Tight end scoring was much better this week compared to last week's
much better
barren wasteland.
Much better this week, but somehow Hunter Henry still leading the way. There were some other injuries this week worth noting. At the quarterback position, Anthony Richardson, he's in the concussion protocol. Hopefully he's all right. He had a heck of a game before he went out with the 2 rushing touchdowns. We'll see how long it takes him to get through that, and hopefully he comes back soon.
Richardson was a top 20 scorer this week, and he only played 1 quarter of action. He was in the top 20 of quarterback scores.
Yeah, well, 2 quick rushing touchdowns will certainly get you there. Also at the quarterback position, Joe Burrow tweaked it's his calf that's been giving him the problem, right? Yeah, tweaked the calf again. He's questionable for this week, but he's got the Monday night game, so that certainly bears watching for fantasy purposes, and hopefully he'll be out there because he's got a lot of other important fantasy pieces attached to him.
Thankfully, this is best ball, and we don't have to worry about whether or not we should have Joe Burrow in our lineup all the way to Monday night. Browning probably not going to be a viable replacement in most lineup leagues.
Yeah, I would imagine he wouldn't quite put up the same level of fantasy points.
Also, should be noted, already owned in our league.
I did not know that. Those were the 2 major quarterback injuries. At the wide receiver position, there was a few injuries there as well. Brandon Ayuk went out with a shoulder injury. They did take x-rays, said they were negative, and we'll see. They said it could possibly be an AC joint as well, which could keep him out a few weeks. Hopefully we'll know more. Hopefully he's all right. Devontae Adams left to be evaluated for a concussion. He was later cleared, but anyone who goes out into the concussion protocol or even just to be evaluated is always worth watching later on. Jalen Waddle in the New England game also left with a concussion, was not cleared, did not come back, is in the concussion protocol now. So we'll see how long that one lasts. But the real story of the injuries this week was the continued attrition at the running back position, apparently picking up the pace from last week. Last week we saw injuries to Aaron Jones, Kenny Gainwell and Austin Eckler. None of them came back and played this week. All their backups played. And in addition to that, we saw injuries to Jamal Williams, Saquon Barkley, David Montgomery, and Nick Chubb. Chubb in particular, that injury, as we all discussed, was just absolutely gruesome to see, and he's not coming back, and it very unfortunate to see.
New year, new season, same story. Running backs are continuing to disintegrate as the season progresses. The interesting thing is how many of these big name running backs were on the now infamous Zoom call that the NFLPA is being investigated for by the NFL about telling their running backs to maybe exaggerate injuries. I don't think Nick Chubb's was faked. That looked pretty real to me, but you never know where some of these other guys are at. Something to monitor as the season progresses, how quickly guys bounce back and get back in action.
Something I hadn't even considered right there. I don't think most of these guys would want to do that. They know that it would probably hurt them more than it would help them in the long run, but I mean, I guess who can say?
Not us, for sure.
No. One other running back I want to mention, not injured, but gone anyways, is Cam Akers. Again, like you said, New Year, same story as last year. I don't understand what's happening there. Apparently, he slept with Sean McVay's wife or something. Like, I don't know.
It's unfolding exactly like it did last year, just at a much quicker pace. This is the same thing that happened last year. They basically sent him home, said they were going to trade him. Trade never happened. By the end of the year, he was their workhorse. I mean,
I look forward to him starting for me in the playoffs.
Right? I have no idea what is going on with Cam Akers and the Los Angeles Rams. At this point, with the amount of running back injuries around the league, you'd think there may actually be a market this time for him. You know, it's possible he actually gets traded. It's also possible we start seeing some of these other veterans sign, the Kareem Hunt, the Leonard Fournettes of the world that are just kind of hanging out there waiting for an opportunity.
Yep. We're recording this Tuesday night, so no one has signed yet. But I did see today. I did see that Kareem Hunt was in Cleveland for a visit. So,
makes sense. They could certainly
there, and he knows the system.
Exactly. They could certainly use the depth. He knows the system. The only guy behind Jerome Ford right now is Pierre Strong, who they just traded for right at the end of the preseason.
Yeah, and he did get the touchdown, but on the play right before that, Strong got absolutely stonewalled at the line, 1-on-1.
Yeah, and I think the only reason he was even in there was because Ford just ran about 70 yards before that, and probably needed a couple of plays.
He ran the 70 yards, but he also ran to the right before he bounced it back to the left. He probably ran like 80 yards that play. Maybe
70 scrimmage yards. It was far more than 70 actual yards.
Yeah, when they do the path and show how long it took, he ran 127 yards for that game, But that was an impressive run though. All right, so let's get to these matchups. We're going to do the same thing we did last week, and we're going to go in descending order of the top score of the winning team, which puts us, just like it did last week, to your matchup at the beginning.
That's good news, right?
Yeah, exactly. Just like you predicted. 0-2. It's a tough one for you this week, my friend.
Does that mean I get the bonus loss?
Bonus. Loss. Can I tell everyone that I was unaware you were making that sounder?
That's the best part about it. I have editorial control.
This is what happens when I have to work during the day and you have free reign with your computer.
I mean, technically I'm working.
Yeah. You tell your employer that. All right, so a little bit of a different story for you this week as compared to last week. Last week you got both wins. This week you end up with both losses. Judd being the highest score of the week with a 260.53, beating you out with a 222.32. Couldn't have gotten 1/10 of a point less to have the straight twos across the board. Work on that for next week, would you?
I'll see what I can do.
Judd's team led by a just absolute monster performance out of Keenan Allen. 34.6 points on 111 yards and 2 touchdowns against Tennessee.
That one hurts more than any other as I stare at my signed Keenan Allen jersey hanging on the wall.
I forgot about that.
Yeah, you gave me that.
I should not have forgotten about that because I gave it to you, but I had forgotten about that. To be fair, it was like 3 years ago that I gave it. Also showing up big for him, Raheem Mostert with a 26, Tyler Lockett with just shy of 30, 29.9. And Christian Kirk having a nice bounce back week 2 after a disappointing week 1 where he ended up with 27.71 points.
Yes. Everyone had nice bounce back weeks against me.
But you might point out that Christian Kirk had an interesting stat line. 1 completion for -1 yards, which is how we ended up with the 0.71 as opposed to an even number.
Right. You don't normally see the extra decimal on non-quarterback scores.
Yeah, that's always a fun one. On your side of things, you had some pretty big performances as well. Specifically, your 2 highest scorers were your stud wide receivers, Justin Jefferson with a 32 and CeeDee Lamb with a 30. Both great weeks, but not quite enough to get you over that league median or over Judd's team.
I had a good week. I would have been the second highest scoring team last week. It just wasn't enough this week. Everybody had good weeks. My good week wasn't good enough.
Some backup running backs making the lineups. You had Jaylen Warren make your starting lineup, and Judd had Tony Jones make his lineup after the Jamal Williams injury.
Jaylen Warren is actually my best running back, so it's not really depth in my case.
I was not expecting that. Probably an accurate statement. You got Gibbs now. You're fine.
I think Warren is actually my running back too. Keep trade cuts.
No, he absolutely is. We went over this before. No, it's Khalil Herbert, I think.
Oh, okay. There we go. Running back 3.
He was your number 2 when you had just Herbert, and now you have Gibbs, so he's now your number 3.
Yeah.
Moving on up in the world you are. That first round pick you traded away to get Raheed Shaheed paying further dividends. He made your lineup another week.
Shaheed. He's a lineup staple for me 2 weeks in a row.
And slightly better tight end performances for your team now that Andrews is back into things. A nice 20-point day for him. 5 receptions. Got into the end zone with a touchdown, so that'll give him a nice bump.
Yep, number 3 tight end on the week.
And Zach Ertz continues his dominance in the desert somehow with Josh Dobbs just targeting him left and right.
Yeah, at least he had slightly more yards this week.
Yep,
I think
got all the way up to 56.
Last week he had about 20 yards on 8 targets. This week he got 56 on 8 targets. That's a big improvement.
You didn't end up with a second quarterback rostered. You ended up with Treylon Burks in your Superflex spot. Disappointing day from Tua and Trevor. Tua Tagovailoa and Trevor Lawrence, I should say.
Well, Lawrence was good enough to get Kirk as one of the higher scoring receivers, but not good enough to help himself, apparently.
He only 6.49 points out of Lawrence. That's a pretty low scoring day, even for a tough game.
Yeah, and our format punishes sacks and fumbles and interceptions and things like that. So
yeah, and Lawrence took 4.
Yeah, he had quite a few negative plays this week.
Your only quarterback in your roster in your starting spot was Jared Goff, who did have one heck of a day. On the other side of things, Judd had Joe Burrow in his Superflex and then Jordan Love in his other quarterback spot.
You're welcome for your QB1, Judd. Enjoy. I know I did this week.
I'm sure he did enjoy, especially considering his weekly opponent. Moving on from there, the number 2 highest scoring team this week was Big Biscuits with a 252.6, beating out Flinch with a 236.6. Both those teams over the median. But before we get into the players, Big's got a new team name.
To have a line as perfect as Jerk Store and to never use it. I couldn't live with myself.
See, there are no jerk stores. It's just a little confusing is all.
It's smart. It's a smart line, and a smart crowd will appreciate it. And I'm not gonna dumb it down for some bonehead mass audience.
So Big with some massive performances from a few of his players, most specifically led the way by Nico Collins and Brian Robinson, both just over 31 points. Josh Dobbs showing out against the Giants with a 26.72. Jerome Ford taking over after Chubb got hurt, up there in his roster, almost 25 points. Big day from Tank Dell, James Cook, Sky Moore, just points up and down the roster. Even Ritter in his super flex spot with a 22. Certainly some impressive performances there. Anything stand out to you?
Just a lot of big bounce backs from last week. I mean, Dobbs had negative points, and this week he was one of the highest scoring quarterbacks on the week. He was actually quarterback 4 on the week in our scoring system.
An impressive performance for sure. On the other side of things, I have to assume quarterback 3 was Russell Wilson because he edged him out by 0.2 of a point.
Yeah, exactly. Big week for Russell Wilson. Big bounce back for him as well. Fantasy-wise, at least. I don't know how happy Fletch is with his Denver Broncos in real life, but fantasy-wise, he put up points this week.
Would have been nicer if they had gotten that probably deserved pass interference call at the end of that game on the 2-point conversion attempt.
Yeah.
Somehow Sean Payton's still not getting any last-second pass interference calls. Who'd have saw that coming? One of the impressive things on Big's team there is he's got 31.85 out of Nico Collins, and at the same time a 22.45 out of Tank Dell. Both guys getting their passes from CJ Stroud, rookie quarterback. That's a heck of a day for 2 wide receivers who are not really at the top of any of the wide receiver rankings lists.
He also got Robert Woods into my lineup. All 3 receivers thrive this week. I have a feeling we're going to be talking about CJ Stroud in one of these matchups coming up.
Yeah, probably. So taking a quick look at Flinch's roster, as we mentioned, Russell Wilson with the big score. Kyron Williams up over 30 points. A heck of a day for him. Filling in for the last-second scratch of Cam Akers. Kyron up there with Zach Moss at the almost 100% snap count. So we'll see how that backfield shakes out going forward. But for now, he's just dominating those touches.
As he did last week, it's just a continuation. I don't know if it's really him filling in for the last-second scratch as much as he was the starter last week in snaps, and he just continued that this week. They just decided they don't need Cam Akers to run 22 times for 29 yards.
I don't think anyone needs anyone to do that. Some other big performances. Lamar Jackson has a nice bounce back week after a disappointing week 1 for Flinch. All these served, he did come up just short in this matchup, but he gets that extra bonus win, which in the overall standings will make a big difference come the end of things.
Certainly better than a bonus loss.
Cut to clip. Bonus. Loss. I'm just going to keep saying that. George Pickens ends up with a nice scoring day, despite the fact that he only had 4 receptions on his 10 targets. Taking a 70-yarder to the house will do that for you.
Yeah, that late game between Kenny Pickett and Deshaun Watson was not a quarterback clinic.
I don't know what we collectively as a country did to deserve that punishment, but I pray that we don't do it again. To touch very briefly on the tight end matchups here, not a whole lot to talk about. Sam Laporta and Trey McBride in for big. Solid day from Laporta. Less so for McBride, just a 7.2, but any points in there is good points. On the other side of things, Flinch had Kincaid and Logan Thomas show up. Kincaid with a 14, Thomas with a 12. Also, in one of the flex spots, Flinch had Gerald Everett with a 10.95. So a few tight ends making themselves known in this matchup. Nothing crazy, though.
First time we've seen Kincaid in the lineup, though. Promising start for him. 6 targets. I mean, that'll play in this format for sure.
Yeah, and 5 catches on those 6 targets as well. So it wasn't like he was getting those empty looks. One appearance in Flinch's lineup that I didn't expect after week 1 was Chase Claypool, who shows up with a 3 for 36 and a touchdown receiving line.
Everybody on Twitter or X was ready to run him out of town after those clips surfaced and news came out that he was going to be a healthy scratch, and here he is, still alive.
He had the 3 receptions, but only 3 receptions on 8 targets. And I don't know about you, but I did not catch any of this game, so I can't really speak to how it went overall. And how effective he was out there.
Right. Well, the problem is he is forced to play because the Bears receiver depth chart is so terrible. And how much of this is really on Justin Fields' awful start to the year, passing wise as well?
Actually, Fields is the next target for all those pundits and trolls on Twitter. If you didn't notice, there's some clips going around of him blatantly ignoring open wide receivers on the All-22 film. It's some of it's pretty ugly.
It hasn't been the start that Fields managers or Chicago Bears fans have hoped for.
Like you said, I don't know if it's all on Fields, but it's certainly not a great situation. And I think Claypool being out there a lot was probably partially a result of Darnell Mooney getting injured as well. All right, up next at number 3, we have JMC with a 247.13, beating Melchrist with a 205.98. Another 2-win week for JMC, an unfortunate another 2-loss week for Mel's team.
Tough start to the year for Mel. He's really run into back-to-back buzzsaws. He's got to have the most points allowed. I haven't looked at the standings, but I mean, back-to-back 240-plus scores against him. It's going to be tough to get wins like that.
Yeah, certainly not his fault either. And his team had a good week this week, but that median score just so high, it makes it almost impossible if you just miss out on 1 or 2 lineup spots to get there. So leading the way for JMC, the combination that you don't normally see is quarterback, running back, but that's basically what he had. He had Daniel Jones with a 32.24. Saquon Barkley was his third highest score at 28.7, but the number one score on his team was the 32.9 of T. Higgins. So 3 guys right there. He's well on his way to 100 points.
T had a nice bounce back week after the 0 last week. And I mean, the giant stack works when Jones throws touchdowns to Saquon, right?
Like I said, it's not the traditional stack, but it sure seemed to work for him this week. Not to mention, both guys get a lot of rushing yards, and sometimes the rushing quarterback can complement the yards per carry of the running back, even if he takes away certain opportunities.
As long as he's not stealing goal line touchdowns, it's definitely a boon for the fantasy prospects of your running backs to have a rushing quarterback. Just one extra guy that the defense has to pay attention to on run fakes and options and things like that.
A couple other pretty nice performances. Deebo Samuel with a 24.35. Speaking of guys that are impressive rushing the ball as well as their normal job, he's certainly that. Amari Cooper gets in there with 20 points.
Cooper was the only passing weapon that did anything and we didn't even expect him to play. He was doubtful going in.
Yeah.
Like he was going to be a game time decision, leaning towards sitting.
Certainly didn't look like he was going to play up until late Sunday, where the news started coming out was, despite reports, it looks like Amari Cooper is going to play tomorrow. And then sure enough, there he was.
And Cooper himself has a long and storied history of poor performances when he's nicked up, not 100% throughout his career. So even more surprising that he showed up.
There once again is the benefit of that best ball, where you don't have to set the lineup. If he does a good job, he's in. And if he doesn't, well, somebody else will be in.
Yeah, I doubt he was in a lot of lineups where people had to set him ahead of time.
No, there'd be no way to trust it on a Monday night. Although with 2 Monday night games, you would have some pivot options. So I'd imagine that it would be more than your average week. On Mel's side of the ball, very impressive performance on Thursday night from DeAndre Swift with a 29.35 points. Just absolutely murdering the hopes and dreams of all Minnesota fans. Ran the ball all over them all day.
Following the theme of disappointing week 1, bouncing back in week 2.
Yeah.
Swift had like 1 carry last week, and this week he had a career high rushing yards.
Well, Kenny Gainwell being now, I'm sure, facilitated some of that, but he certainly looked like he deserved all the carries he was getting. He just could not be stopped.
Right, he looked good. You'd think if he looked this good, he could have earned more than 1 carry last week. Apparently, wasn't in the game plan.
Mel's big performances Outside of that, mostly came at the quarterback position. Josh Allen with a 26, Geno Smith with an impressive 24.6. On his bench, he had Mac Jones and Justin Fields with less impressive performances, but I just wanted to point out again, he's got some really good quarterback depth.
It's definitely nice in Superflex to have that many viable starting quarterbacks. You're almost certain to get at least 2 quarterbacks in every week.
Also putting up some impressive points in his lineup were Tony Pollard, who continues to just get the vast majority of the work over Rico Dowdle, despite all of our protests. And I couldn't say it with a straight face.
I'm not sure anyone's clamoring for more Rico Dowdle, okay? I don't think that exists in this world. Maybe Rico's mom.
Rico Dowdle is filling the Tony Pollard role from the last couple of years. You know, everybody just clamoring for the backup Dallas running back. That's how it goes, right?
I think the difference was Tony Pollard was actually good and deserved more carries.
The other impressive running back performance from Mel comes from the aforementioned Zach Moss, who, like Pollard, just on the field constantly, 18 carries, 88 yards, and a touchdown.
It's almost disappointing that he only had 18 for 88 when he played 100% of the snap in a game that they pretty much led throughout.
I was going to say they were dominating that game pretty much from the start to the end as well.
Other running backs played a single offensive snap. He was out there 100% of the snaps.
Again, I can't pretend to have watched very much of this game. I caught the highlights on Red Zone, but I have to assume that there was a lot of empty yards for Houston that just must have kept the Indy offense off the field for a decent portion of the game.
Yeah, exactly. The problem was the Colts just kept scoring so quickly that there wasn't a lot of long drives.
It's a tough problem right there.
And it allowed CJ Stroud to throw 700 times.
So looking at the tight end position, this one looks an awful lot like what things looked like last week for most teams. For the second week in a row, Jonnu Smith makes JMC's tight end lineup, but this time it looks a little bit different because he actually did something. 4 for 47 with 3 first downs gets him up to 13.2 points. But the real big thing is he had Kelsey back, and obviously limited work for Kelsey. Low yardage total, 4 receptions, 26 yards, but got into the end zone. Gets him a 15.6. And on Mel's side of things, the other Kansas City tight end, Noah Gray, getting in there at 10.05. And Austin Hooper with a 2 for 20 line gets into his second tight end spot. So a little bit disappointing for his tight ends, which probably is part of the reason why he ended up on the wrong side of this matchup. But 2 Kansas City tight ends in there against each other. And hopefully there are brighter days ahead for Mel's tight end room.
The biggest notable absence from this lineup is Kyle Pitts, of course. Somehow Jonnu Smith made the lineup over him, probably because he outproduced him. It's been an unfortunate recurring theme for Kyle Pitts throughout last season and now into this season.
Pitts has been pretty disappointing. The 1,000-yard rookie season showed us what he can do, but they just, for whatever reason, don't. I've said it before. I love Arthur Smith. I love what he's doing offensively, but man, is it tough for fantasy.
Right. Last week was Drake London with the goose egg. This week, Kyle Pitts doing nothing. It's going to be tough to support more than one pass game option, unless you count the running backs as major pass game options.
Again, same as with last week. Mel has nothing to complain about in this instance, though, because Mac Hollins made his lineup.
Mac Hollins, the savior. Back-to-back weeks now.
It's tough when Mac Hollins is out there outscoring Kyle Pitts. It's just not a great situation.
Yeah, especially with the tight end premium that we have in this league.
And again, I don't know how much of that to put on Pitts. I don't know how much of that to put on the scheme. I don't know how much of it to put on Ritter.
I know I'm not putting any of that on Kyle Pitts because we know he can play. We've seen it.
Yeah. It's just, who knows when it's going to get better, if it's going to get better, and if and when it does, how long it'll take.
It's just frustrating for fantasy because you've seen the talent. You know it's there. If this guy played for the Vikings in a TJ Hawkinson role, if he's getting 130 targets a year, that would be a much different story than what we're seeing right now. it's tough to wait. Normally, tight ends take a while to develop, and we were spoiled because he had such a good rookie year. And it's really been just not promising since then.
He'll have a wonderful career with whatever his second team is because he's not re-signing in Atlanta.
Yeah, I mean, we need to get rid of either Arthur Smith or Kyle Pitts need to go to a different team to ever see his true ceiling, unfortunately. But a lot of tight ends hit their stride on a second contract. We saw it with your favorite tight end, Evan Ingram, even after a promising rookie season from him.
Yeah, it's absolutely a fair point. You know, you normally see that second year jump from the wide receivers. Tight end, it usually takes at least until that third year before you start seeing some serious production. But this is year 3 and we're not seeing any production, let alone better production.
It's only week 2, so we're not going to get too carried away. But especially Mel staring down the barrel of an 0-4 start and having a guy like that in the season preview, we said his tight end room was going to live or die based on Kyle Pitts. If Kyle Pitts didn't take a leap back to where he was his rookie year, he was going to struggle to get production from this group. And it's proven true through 2 weeks at least.
The number 4 highest scoring team of the week is Flea Flickers with a 240.47, beating out Mr. Good News, my favorite team name, Little Jerry Seinfeld. Little Jerry Seinfeld with a 225.94. Flea gets her second 2-win week in a row, puts her at first place in the league standings. So congrats to her. Let's see if she can maintain this pace and how long she can maintain it for. Leading the way for her team this week was Mike Evans with a 32 and TJ Hawkinson with a 31.85. Both very impressive performances. 3 touchdowns between the pair of them.
So far through 2 weeks, her stars have really showed up. We knew that her team was going to be dependent on the stars because it didn't have a lot of depth. And the stars have pulled through once again. Anthony Richardson only made it through 1 quarter, and he still had one of the higher scoring QB weeks. Bijan Robinson had a big week. Mike Evans, Devontae Smith, TJ Hawkinson, Darren Waller, all her big name players produced. If they score at their ceiling like this every week, she's going to be tough to beat.
Yeah, absolutely. She's got some big names putting up big points early, and that's your recipe for success. You want your big guys to come through because they're the ones who are going to give you the massive scores.
And if it gets buoyed by some of these bench guys we weren't expecting to score big on a week-to-week basis, then she really hits the top end of the scoring. You know, guys like Nelson Aguilar had a big week. Khalif Raymond had a surprisingly good week.
Well, you mentioned Richardson there. I remember we were texting during the game after Richardson got hurt and Minshew started coming in and balling out. You said how interesting it would be if both of her quarterback scores were filled by the 2 Colts quarterbacks, and we came damn close. Minshew finished with a 12.14. Probably would have scored more had they needed to, but it was such a blowout that they basically stopped throwing. And he was only a little more than 2 points behind Stafford, who ended up in her super flex spot with a 14.73.
Exactly. She almost had 2 quarterbacks on the same team on the same week, both in her lineup. That would have been fun to see. And not in the Taysom Hill as a quarterback, air quote, quarterback.
I'm not sure. I'd have to go back and check every week, but I'm fairly certain that has not happened before. Or at least not for a team that won their matchup.
I'm sure Taysom had some spike weeks.
Yeah, but I meant outside of the guy who's eligible at quarterback who really isn't actually playing quarterback.
Right. Yeah, generally you don't see a 2-headed quarterback monster in the NFL. It's not usually an effective system. Colts just happen to have a very high-end backup.
What year was it that the Bears went to the Super Bowl with Rex Grossman as their starter? Was that like 2008-ish?
I try to block that year out.
They played quarterback carousel that entire year.
There have been some rough quarterbacks in the that have made it all the way to the Super Bowl. Quarterbacks that didn't necessarily start the season as the starter. But they usually don't win.
Generally not, except for somehow Nick Foles.
Also Jeff Hostetler.
All right,
for your New York Football Giants.
Was not the reference that I expected there. But yeah, no, it's an accurate one.
You weren't expecting a Jeff
I was not.
Hostetler
Nope.
reference on a 2023 Dynasty podcast?
Again, this is what the people come for. All 7 of them.
We have more kids than that. I know there's more people listening.
All right, going over to the other side of the matchup here. Mr. Good News got the performance of the week out of Puka Nacua. And this is 2 weeks in a row now where he's just shown up in a massive way. 15 receptions, 147 yards, 7 first downs, and also 2 carries. Only 4 yards, but man, they're just getting him involved every way.
20 targets. After 15 targets week 1, he now has 35 targets through his first 2 career games. He's got the most receiving yards by any player through his first 2 career games. He is the entire LA Rams offense right now. It is running through him. And
how dare you besmirch Kyron Williams like this?
All right, the entire passing offense for the LA Rams. I mean, 20 targets.
How
is absurd.
dare you besmirch Tutu Atwell like this?
Tutu Atwell's not getting 20 targets. Keenan Allen doesn't get 20 targets. Justin Jefferson doesn't get 20 targets. This is absurd.
Everyone who is listening, paying attention there, this is why it hurt him so much when Keenan Allen scored so many points against him. He literally just listed Keenan Allen before Justin Jefferson on his list of who deserves 20 targets.
I'm listing them in order of talent on my own. Totally unbiased.
I was just going to wait it out.
On my own personal, totally unbiased opinion.
Damn you for making me have to unmute and say both of those things through a mouthful of food.
That's what you get for eating during the podcast.
It's 10:45 at night. I haven't eaten yet.
That's why
because of the podcast.
That's why my dinner is getting cold sitting beside me.
With this incredible start from Nacua, you sent me a couple screenshots earlier of trades that have taken place in other leagues. Now you pulled these from another page on Dynasty Daddy, which we've been using for our power rankings and playoff predictor rankings, correct?
Correct. Dynasty Daddy added some new features, a couple of things we're going to go through that are probably interesting for the league. The first one is a trade database where they can pull from about 60,000 leagues that are loaded in there, and you can filter it for your league settings. So we can look at, since we didn't have any trades this week in our league, we can kind of look and see what kind of trades are being done in similar formats. Not similar, but exactly the same formats. Same amount of teams, same amount of starters, same amount of tight end premium scoring, all of that stuff. And I thought the Puka Nacua trades were interesting to look at and see where he's come on his meteoric rise over the last 2 weeks.
He shot up like a rocket up these wide receiver ranks, and very difficult to put a valuation on a player who was just drafted this year in the later rounds, but all of a sudden has just shot up the usage charts, shot up the production charts, and everyone wants to know, is it how much of it is for real, how much of it will continue, and also people want to jump when they see an opportunity. And some people are trying to sell and sell high, and some people are trying to buy in now and get in at the ground floor and hopefully have a productive player for the rest of his career.
It's definitely an interesting strategy decision, right? How much do you have to see before you're willing to buy in that this is the reality? We said last week, 15 targets is not going to happen every week. And then he had 20 targets this week. So that's already, some of that's already out the door. But
if this pace continues, next week he's going to have 25 targets and 20 catches.
If he does that, his trade value is going to go up even more. I'm not sure how much higher he can go for a guy that was a 4th round rookie pick by ADP in the offseason. He's trading for future first round picks at the moment.
One of the trades that you sent me was just straight up Nacua for a 2024 mid-first. So that's heavy belief right there. That's I think this is going to continue. I think he's going to be a valuable piece. I'm willing to expend some serious capital right now to go out and get him.
Yep, that's one part of the strategy. That person has obviously seen enough. They're ready to buy in. If he produces like this, even close to this, even 75% of this the rest of the way, he's definitely worth a first round pick. Plus, someone's trying to get in there before the price goes up even higher. The other issue is for those of us that have been playing for a long time, we've seen flashes like this from players that everybody remembers. Travis Fulgham a couple of years ago, who was not a highly touted guy, bounced around and then had a crazy stretch where he was putting up massive points and people were trading first round picks for him. And just as quickly, he was basically out of the league.
I remember I picked him up and used him several weeks in redraft. Couldn't trade him though. I tried real hard to trade Fulgham.
Right.
So that trade right there for the first rounder took place yesterday. One that took place 7 days ago. So after week 1's production, but before week 2's production. On one side was AJ Brown and a 2024 third for Puka, Romeo Dubs, Khalil Herbert, and 224 mid-second rounders. So obviously that was after week 1, but before this even more massive week 2 performance. One team trying to consolidate, going to AJ Brown, sending out some depth. The other team bringing back in the depth. And I mean, we don't know if they play best ball or not, but we do know this team is a similar scoring format in tight end premium, full PPR, start 12 team leagues. It's a very comparable league outside of the we don't know if it's best ball or not.
Now, on one side, you have somebody trying to capitalize on big first weeks from Nacua and also Romeo Dobbs and trying to parlay that into a top end asset in AJ Brown, who had a down week 1. So that's a common strategy we see in dynasty leagues. Sell high, buy low. Who knows, after week 2, the person who picked up Nacua and Dobbs probably feels pretty good right now, since he had another down week from AJ Brown and an even better week from Puka.
Those are some of the trades that we saw on the trade database. I found it interesting to see how this just meteoric rise for Nacua has affected some of the leagues. Not that we were in, but just leagues in general. And we'll see if Mr. Good News decides he wants to cash out or if he just rides the wave and see where it goes. I think everyone across the fantasy community is a little bit shocked at how much work Nacua is getting, and it'll be interesting to see how long it sustains.
It's definitely a fun story through 2 weeks. We'll see if it turns into a day 3 to elite fantasy asset a la Amon-Ra St. Brown. I feel like it took the fantasy community a lot longer to buy into Amon-Ra St. Brown than it did for Puka Nacua.
It definitely did. That's an excellent comp right there. Although his breakout was late in his rookie year, not at the very beginning like this. So maybe if we had seen it right from the beginning, the buy-in would have been quicker.
That's fair. We only have a 2-week sample size to draw on right now. Yeah. And right now he's the wide receiver 1 overall.
Well, it's a 2-week sample size, but it's a 40 target sample size. Looking at the rest of Mr. Good News' roster here, he had some nice performances that served to get him over that league median and get him the bonus win. Just like we discussed in our season preview, led the way by his wide receivers, obviously.
Wait a minute. By his wide receivers?
Yep. Gabe Davis with 25, Mike Williams with 21, Isaiah Hodgins with 16, Cortland Sutton with 14, Darius Slayton with 11.5. Like I said, all those wide receivers that his team is built on.
Yeah, I don't think this is what Mr. Good News had in mind.
Might not be what he intended, but it's what he's going to get, I suppose. He might not have quite the brand name wide receivers that some other teams have, but they all stepped up this week, filling in for those running backs who were a little disappointing in a lot of instances.
Hey, he's going to need the wide receiver help going forward, especially after losing Nick Chubb.
Yeah, again, that injury just absolutely brutal. Not a great game from Jacobs, but still in the lineup anyways.
Still in the lineup despite negative rushing yards on the day.
Yeah. It's not what you usually expect from the defending league leader in rush yards.
Right. Hasn't been an ideal start to the season for Josh Jacobs or the Las Vegas Raiders.
Just one last thing to touch on. You brought up Hawkinson and Waller on Flea's side of things, but Mr. Good News with Noah Fant and Kylan Granson in his lineup at tight end. Solid performances from both of them, 13.6 and 13.35, so not bad, but nothing really special there. Number 5, we have Criddle with a 210.48, beating out Georgia Mike with a 98.25. Georgia Mike inching up there almost to that triple-digit mark. But congrats to both of these guys on Criddle having the highest margin of victory, and congrats to Georgia Mike for scoring as few points as possible.
Right. His team delivered this week on what they were supposed to do. Led by running back 1, Rico Dowdle.
So we're at that point of the day where we say, unfortunately, all these teams remaining finished below the league median. So no extra bonus win for these 4 remaining teams, but a bonus loss for all 4 of them. Bonus. Loss. For Criddle, it was actually a fairly balanced scoring output from some of his guys. He had just shy of 25 from Hurts. A nice solid quarterback performance there, helped out by those rushing touchdowns. Christian McCaffrey with a 23. Your boy Marvin Mims with a 21. Heck of a day considering the low snap count.
Efficient.
That it, you good?
That's the whole.
That's the whole
analysis.
That's it. That's the post. A nice 20-point day out of Sam Howell at the Superflex position. Just under 20 from Tutu Atwell. Just over 20 from Brandon Johnson. Apparently he has more than one Denver wide receiver rostered. That would explain why he's down here with the rest of us who didn't get that bonus win.
Too many Broncos.
Not a bad day from any of these guys in Criddle's lineup outside of the tight end position where we were under 10 points from both his starters. A disappointing day from Kittle. A good day from Disley. And they scored the exact same amount of points.
That's unfortunate.
So despite your prediction from earlier, we are not actually going to talk about CJ Stroud in a starting lineup today. Mostly because he took 6 sacks, lost a fumble, and all those negative points were enough to get him just under Sam Howell's score. So Stroud with the 19.46 ended up on Criddle's bench.
Yeah, sometimes the quarterback scoring in this format can be tough. 384 yards, passing, multiple touchdowns. Still not good enough to crack the lineup.
No, but an encouraging performance overall from Stroud, and it's nice to see the rookie get a good passing day in early on and show the promise.
It's nice to see the fantasy ceiling, right? We weren't sure what we were going to get out of Stroud. Amazing he only took 6 sacks considering his entire offensive line was backups this week. But it was nice to him to show that ceiling. He now has more career 300-yard passing games than fellow Ohio State alum Justin Fields.
Ooh, that's a stat you don't want to hear if you're our Fields manager or a Bears fan.
Yeah, good start for Stroud, though, fantasy-wise at least.
As we mentioned before, Georgia Mike aiming for that 101, not trying to score a lot of points, but you still want to see the young guys that he does have rostered with nice days and everything. And Drake London had a good bounce-back performance after his goose egg in week 1. Putting up 21.2 points this week, 6 catches, 67 yards, and a touchdown.
Jaden Reed had a nice game for the Packers this week. A couple of touchdowns.
Pittman with another solid performance as well. Still waiting on that breakout from Quentin Johnston there, but
He's still kind of buried on that depth chart. He really hasn't been able to earn targets. Mike Williams and Keenan Allen both dominating the targets, both in double digits. Not a lot of extra targets to go around, even without Eckler there this week.
they throw the ball quite a bit. You would expect that at some point they at least try to get him some looks.
It'll come as the season progresses.
Yeah.
Keenan Allen and Mike Williams don't have the greatest injury track record besides. So there's a chance that he gets forced into more action, even if it doesn't come organically.
2 weeks without much work is not cause for concern. If we're here at the end of the season, then it'll be more concerning. But for right now, it's not worrisome.
Right. Still very early. It's only been 2 weeks, despite Puka Nacua's 347 targets through 2 weeks.
Let's say
I'm not ready to sign his death warrant yet.
Sean McVay can figure it out. Why can't everyone else?
Right. Get QJ on the Rams. He could get at least 4 targets there.
At least. So moving on from that one to the lowest scoring winning score of the week.
Hey, look, it's your team.
Yep. Yep, that would be me. I edged out Benign Rug with a 177.96 to a 151.57. Not an impressive week from either one of our teams. Fairly disappointing. More so for my team, who has not decided that it wants to sell, unlike Rug.
I think your running backs might be deciding that for you.
Oh my goodness. I have none left. There are no more running backs on my team.
Well, you have a couple left. You still got AJ Dillon. I think the problem is you don't really want AJ Dillon.
No. Wow. Not the way he's playing anyways. 15 carries for 55 yards. That's not good.
You know, but AJ Dillon has always been a guy who starts slow too. It seems like every year we go through this.
Yep.
Not exactly to the Cam Akers degree, but it feels like the last few years he's really struggled to get out of the gates. I don't know if it's because he's a big back. It takes him longer to get in game shape or what, but by December he's rolling every year.
Yep.
Just have to hope that at that point it still matters for you.
Or whoever's team he ends up on, if anybody.
Fair. I did see that you put him on the block. I was going to ask you about that.
Well, it was mostly just so many running back injuries across the league. And it's specific to my team. If I'm already going to have a bad running back room, I may as well lean into it and try and be strong elsewhere. But just so many running back injuries across the league, I thought, well, he's not one of those guys that's going to cost, multiple firsts or anything like that. So maybe someone's looking to add on not exactly on a budget because he's more than just a replacement level, but maybe someone's looking to add in that middle tier. I'm going to now use this as my platform to publicly advertise for trades.
Please trade for AJ Dillon.
We all know that's the real reason you wanted a podcast in the first place.
Yeah, I think it's had the opposite effect because now no one wants to trade with me because no one wants me to talk about the trade on the show.
Well, but to get into this matchup a little bit, no real great performances outside of Kirk Cousins. He had that massive game trying to continuously come back against the Eagles on Thursday night. Ended up with 364 yards, 4 touchdowns. So he gets 31.56 points. Certainly can't complain about that.
Yeah, it was definitely a good compiling day for fantasy. I don't think all of the team turnovers helped in real life, but it definitely helped Thatcher Jesus score a lot of fantasy points.
I had forgotten about that you could set the nicknames. I had forgotten until just now, and I read it a minute ago, and I kind of remember, wasn't it? Somebody said he opened up the quarterback show with a Margaret Thatcher quote or something like that. I can't remember.
Yeah, the Netflix quarterback show.
Oh my goodness.
The surprise star of the Netflix quarterback show.
The weird thing is, my wife and I actually started watching some of that show, and we're like 2 episodes in. I have no recollection of that whatsoever. I don't think I caught the very beginning of the episode, though. I think I was in the other room at the time.
Kirk Cousins is such a goofball, but he seems like a genuine goofball. It's not like a phony goofball like Russell Wilson.
Does Russell Wilson come across as a goofball? I don't know if that's the word I would have used.
That's the YouTube word that we have to use.
That's fair. So a couple of the noteworthy performances in this matchup. We're just going to skip around because there's few enough of them that we don't want to go side by side. Josh Reynolds for Benign Rug had his second good week in a row. Reynolds, 26.35 points on the strength of 2 touchdowns.
He's the JMO that we were promised. He's really filled that role for them well, though. They really needed a second dependable option outside of Amon-Ra St. Brown. I know Laporta's done a good job with a lot of the underneath stuff. He's turning a lot of his receptions into first downs, key moments, but they needed that second outside guy. And Josh Reynolds has certainly filled the void through 2 weeks. That offense needs him.
Hunter Henry continuing his season of dominance at the tight end position. Your tight end 1 currently.
Yeah, you're welcome. You're welcome, Rug. Again.
A 22.2 on 6 catches for 52 yards and a touchdown. That's 2 weeks in a row over 50 yards with a touchdown for Hunter Henry.
Yeah, I could have used a high-scoring tight end like that. Maybe I wouldn't have got the bonus loss this week.
Bonus. Loss. The only other performance, even over 20 points for either one of these two teams, Patrick Mahomes with a 23.45. Just a stat compiling day for him. Not a very impressive performance. Didn't really look all that great in my opinion, but enough work that he got over the hump in the end.
Even a bad Patrick Mahomes game is still better than 90% of the league.
Also worth noting, a 21.6 point performance from Dak Prescott on the bench for my team. A solid day that would have seen the starting lineup for a good number of teams at quarterback, but stuck behind Thatcher Jesus and Patrick Mahomes.
You have an embarrassment of riches at quarterback.
Well, I have to have one somewhere. Everything else is just embarrassing.
I was hoping that's what you were going to say.
Let's get out of this matchup before we get infected by its stink.
Yes, please.
All right, so that brings us to the end of the matchup section. Some much more impressive scores this week. Some much worse scores from a couple of us as well, but we don't need to harp on that. But again, the league, the NFL and the fantasy league are just much higher scoring than last week. All right, so next we're going to jump over and take a look at the updated playoff odds. Again, this is on Dynasty Daddy. We're going to see not a ton of movement at the top. A couple of teams drop down a little bit. The top chance to make the playoffs is now JMC at 96%. Second highest is Vandelay Industries. That would be you at 95%. And then third is Mr. Good News at 91%. So 3 teams still up at that 90% chance. All those teams projected records between 18-10 and 17-11. So
wait, you mean I'm not the number 1 team anymore?
No,
we need to find a new site. This is unacceptable.
Well, that's what happens when you go 0-2 on a week, Mr. Bonus Loss.
I don't want to talk about it.
That's a good one.
That's my catchphrase.
This is a terrible catchphrase.
That's why it's my catchphrase.
After those top 3 in the 90s, Judd on the strength of a double win week this week with an 87% chance. Flinch with an 81% chance. And then that's the tier break right there. It's those 5 teams all above 80%. The next highest is where it gets somewhat interesting. I'm down at 57%. Flea down at 41%, but still only projected to finish at 14-14 on the season. The same thing with Mel's team last week. Mel's now projected 24% chance to make the playoffs. And again, an 0-4 start is a tough thing to overcome, but I don't know if I agree with these percentages for the teams that aren't in that top section.
Yeah, same. Feels a little light. Feels like some of these teams should be a little bit closer.
Flea is 4-0 and at the top of the league. They're only giving her a 41% chance. That feels wrong.
Yeah, the computer simulator doesn't like her team as much as we seem to.
Yeah, and that's fine. I mean, we're using this for projections. That doesn't mean it's going to be accurate, and that's part of the fun. We get to see how it changes and evolves over the course of the season, and we get to see how accurate it is and how all the managers in the league adjust their team goals and adjust their team directions as everything evolves.
Right. It's a long season and we're only 2 weeks in. It feels like the entire season because it is the entire season so far. But there's still a lot to be played.
Flea at 41, Mel at 24. After that, Big with his new team name of the Jerk Store. Took me a second to see who that was. At 17%. And then Criddle at 12%. And then Rugg and Georgia Mike both less than 1% chance. We've actually seen that bottom tier of teams come up in percentages. Some of that middle tier come down in percentages. And that top tier basically stay the same. But a couple of teams join that top tier.
Right. You still see the same teams in roughly the same spots. The only one who's really moved around a lot is Mel. Everyone else is still roughly where they were 2 weeks ago. And it makes sense that Mel would drop a little bit starting 0-4.
Yeah. Tough go at the beginning for him. All right, well, that brings us to the end of the show. Next week, we're hopeful we're going to be able to start our interview series with different managers in the league. So hopefully we'll have that to look forward to. In the meantime, let's try to be more active on the trade block there, have some more content and some more trades to discuss for next week. I'm looking at you, Al.
I'll do my best.
That's what you said last time.
Damn it, I'm trying.
All right, so everyone stop ignoring him, because when you ignore his trade requests, I get the feedback. Not the specific feedback, but the I can't get any trades done feedback.
Trying to get some for the pod.
All right, well, everybody have a good week, and we'll see you next time.
Arrivederci.
I was hoping the Arrivederci was coming.
That was the closer.
No, you're keeping all of this in.
Well, the Jerk Store called. They're running out of you. What's the difference? You're their all-time bestseller. Yeah? Well, I had sex with your wife.